Academic, where we are criminally academic. My name is Christine Baggio.
My name is Krisha Marie
And
Arantilla.
today, we have doctoral candidate Arnold Unido on podcast to talk with us about corruption and organized crime.
Arnold Unido is a doctoral candidate in sociology at the University of Santo Tomas with designated emphasis in computational social science. He is a first-generation student and received his bachelor's degree in psychology and Japanese before transitioning to sociology for his doctoral work. He uses governmental data and computational method to research abuses of power. His dissertation focuses on public harm by government officials at the local, state, and national level, and he received the American Sociological Association's Dissertation Research Improvement Grant for this work. Thank you so much for joining us, Arnold.
Thank you for having me.
So again, a brief overview of what this episode is going to look like. First, we're going to ask some questions about the history of corruption, mainly in the Philippines. Then we're going to talk about a little bit organized crime. And then again, situation in the Philippines. And the reason for that is because our final topic is the paper that our guest wrote. He's situated in the Philippines and talk about corruption and organized crime. And a little bit of network analysis, which our episode with John. We learned we keep butchering his name. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, John. His episode touches a lot of network analysis. And so that what being said, Krisha, why don't you take us away?
Okay, so we always start our podcast with this very broad definitional question because we're pretty concerned with definitions that we think are very important. And as with every single time we ask this question, I'm sure it's really difficult to define, but our first question for you, Arnold, is what is corruption?
That's very difficult to define, and I don't think there's a single canonical definition that exists in the literature yet. Because if you can look at it from a strictly legal definition, there are like 17 specific laws that if you broke it, you're guilty of corruption. But I think that's not how the most people think about it. Corruption is inherently a relation to what is ordinary and not corrupt. The term is a sort of very morally charged when people think of a corrupt politician. I don't think they're thinking of, they broke the specific law. It's a feeling that they have violated the trust that has been placed into them. And I think people are pretty good at picking up of those sorts of things. I think people are good at telling when things aren't fair. So when I think about corruption, I typically take a public harm perspective. Like, are these individuals using their powers to harm public people benefits themselves? Personally, I think there's a common thread through all of the definitions that we see is that they're using power vested in them by some other entity to enrich themselves personally. So, when I think of corruption, that is the sort of defining characteristic I think about.
So, most of what we're talking about involves state actors. So, how and why do state actors engage in corruption?
The why is always difficult. That's the whole field of criminology. But the sort of a broad answer is that corruption is the mechanism by which people can convert their power into profit. Corruption is the way that they can take these things that they have for a temporary amount of time. They're the office, they hold the prestige associated with it and convert it into something lasting for themselves. So that seems to be why corruptions and get into organized crime later go hand in hand.
So many people they know, like large scale, like widely reported political wrongdoings that involve corruption. One example was Jensen Representative Bill Cunningham, who had to resign after it came to light that he was accepting bribes from defense companies. However, crimes of the corruption seems to occur every day, even look a smaller scale. Can you give us an example of what's more common or not widely reported? crime of corruption would look like.
Yeah, corruption happens all the time. There's sort of the grift and oiling of hands that make many things work. It happens whenever a government official picks on a contract over another a building or something service because he got a nicer gift basket from one of them. You know, lobbying on the federal level, it specifically says in the legal code that lobbying should not affect the voting behavior of our representatives, but study shows over and over that it does. But you know, going back to our fuzzy definition of corruption, is that corruption? Can we prove that the lobbying expenditure influenced their votes? It's remarkably difficult. My current work, my dissertation, as its forfeiture is a large portion of it. So one of my favorite stories to tell is in Georgia. There was a sheriff who used a set of forfeiture funds police agencies receive from seizing money and objects from things they think is associated with a crime. He used those funds to buy the share of a high-performance muscle of a car drove from work. Again, is that corruption? I don't know, but those sorts of things happen.
Sounds nice though, and we will be back for a while.
Don't know what to do whenever you are near. Don't know what to say, my heart is floating in tears. When you passed by, I could fly. Every minute, every second of the day, I dream of you in the most special way. You're beside me all the time.
And we are back. Welcome. So, Arnold, please tell us what's next. Sounds like a nice car. So when you're trying to understand then, like why crimes are corrupting are occurring, or those, more fuzzy questions, can we understand this type of crime using our traditional theoretical perspective like social learning, theory, control, self-control, and so on? Or are those very specific theories devoted?
I think that the traditional theories struggle with corruption and white-collar crime more generally. Sally Simpson has a good American Sociological Review article trying to look at traditional theories of crime and how they work and I don't work with a collar crime. But I think we just have to sort of accept and understand that many of our canonical theories we made with. Street crime in mind, they were looking at violent, on the grounds of offenses, which corruption, while collar crime more generally, typically, isn't it? There is a specific theories that specifically says we work for white collar crime like self-control, but that's never really convinced me because the whole argument of self-control is like, well, just the people with the lower self-control commit crimes. But white-collar crime and other forms of corruption, they take years. These are large schemes sometimes. And I think it's hard to argue that those people don't have self-control. There is some work on personality theories like the dark triad of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. But as a sociologist, I find those unsatisfying because I want to see the system that allow corruption, that these things to persist. Because the system might be able to fix individual psychological characteristic. We're not going to be able to do nothing about this really. So when I'm working on things, I've sort of time terms that my dissertation sort of basically takes a routine activity sort of lens and perspective. because I want to see what we can do to the structures of governance, how we might be able to alter to make corruption less feasible, less likely, and less possible. That's the sort of orientation I find myself slipping into.
Yeah, that's interesting, like a routine activity of approach. Like that's so very macro. So would you say something that right approach or something like instead of something more at the individual level?
I think it's what I gravitate to because I think it's slightly more hopeful. Like if these things are structural, we may be able to do something about them. If we specifically look for ways to police like individual people by, increasing punishment or something like that. I think we've seen over time and like generally deterrence doesn't work for thing. So like how I look it from a structural perspective, just because I want to have something word of hope that we can do something about it, I suppose.
Okay, I can respect that.
Yes. I respect that also, and thank you so much, Arnold.
In this time of pandemic where COVID-19 is very dangerous and alarming, we must sanitize ourselves time by time. This ethyl alcohol can help us sanitize ourselves time by time because it has 70% of solution. This casino ethyl alcohol has a chemical called ethyl or ethanol, which is a very important industrial chemical because it is used as solvent in the synthesis of other organic chemicals. Ethanol is also the intoxicating ingredient of many alcoholic beverages such as beer, wine, and distilled spirits. When it comes to alcohol, I choose the skin-friendly and natural alcohol. Casino ethyl alcohol kills 99.9% of germs. Made from sugarcane, it helps to moisturize our skin. 35 germ killers so that virus and diseases will die. Casino ethyl alcohol, skin-friendly, germ-friendly.
Wow, that was epic. What a wonderful and powerful explanation. I wasn't expecting that. Thank you for having us today, Mr. Arnold Unido.
Hope to see you again in our next episode.
So that's it for today. This is Criminology Academic, where you can understand what crime is all about. Again, I am Christine Joy Balbagio.
I am Trisha Marie Arandilla.
We are the Stop, Drop, and Roll.